Hello and welcome back to Afterglow, and this one's going to be another bonus episode for MECC, otherwise known as the Minnesota Educational Computing Consortium, or later on the Minnesota Educational Computing Corporation. But originally this episode started out as an episode for Number Munchers, but I felt like this would be better off as an episode talking about my history with MECC, as well as the company as a whole, just because Number Munchers is a really short, simple game. I didn't have a whole lot to say because my memories honestly are pretty dim, because the last time I played it was like 30 years ago. But these are also the guys behind stuff like the Oregon Trail. Number Munchers and Oregon Trail are really the two big ones I know them from, but they also did the Island of Dr. Quandary, which that was kind of like a big one for them. And most of my memories are from their Apple II stuff. However, they did go on to make some stuff for DOS until they actually were bought out in a hostile takeover. And finally they shut down in '99, which was it was really a shame. But they had some really cool educational titles, and the Munchers games and the Oregon Trail being the ones that I remember mostly. I believe that Odell Lake was pretty popular too, but that's not one I ever played. You also had Fraction Munchers and Lewis and Clark Stayed Home, both of which I'd never played but sound interesting, and Circus Math, I believe, were their most popular ones. But they did have a rather large selection even beyond that, which I'll be talking about in this episode. But first, of course, we want to do our Patreon shout-out. A special shout-out to the following patrons: Mr. Gimmicks Needed, Ringo the Samurai, OCD in Every RPG, and Texan Toby with Big Red Flavor. These guys have all pledged at the $1 a month Patreon tier, which gives them a shout out at the end of an episode, something that you can join in on if you all feel the need to. Of course, the Patreon thing is totally optional. The only thing I do there is a shout out. The podcast will always be free for everyone to listen to. So I want to start this off with my memories of MECC, which mostly are due from the school I went to having a bunch of Apple II computers at the time. Now, these computers are pretty quaint by today's standards, but I'll tell you what, they had some really entertaining games on them. The big two for me being the Oregon Trail, along with Number Munchers, although I do believe some of them played Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego as well, which will be outside the scope of this episode, as that one actually came from Broderbund instead of MECC. But you always knew it was an MECC game from that white boot screen with the black lettering underneath, and at the time I kind of ignored it, but MECC is actually based, well, they were actually based over in Minnesota, of all places, which is kind of a unique little thing. But a lot of times, if you got your work done early, the teacher would allow you to go play on the computer a little bit, of which there were a few games available. I played a lot of Number Munchers and Oregon Trail. Now, Number Munchers was a pretty simple game to where it had math equations. Like, you had a grid with a bunch of questions on it. And at the top, you have to eat the answers that equal a certain answer. So let's say you have to eat all the answers that equal 9. Well, on this grid, you control this character. I always thought he looked like a frog. But you control this dude who goes around and he can move on this grid where you've got the answers. So if you have to eat the equations that equal 9, of course, if you come across one that says 7 plus 2, you eat it. If you come across one that is 5 plus 1 and you eat it, I believe you lost a life. But there was another way to lose a life in this game as well, and that was due to the Troggles. The Troggles are these ugly-looking sprite creatures that come in off the edge of the screen onto the grid, although you do get a little warning on the edge of where it's coming in. It'll say, like, Troggle warning, and they'll come in on the edge, and the troggle can eat you and you can lose a life that way. So not only are you finding the answers to these equations, but you are also attempting to dodge these troggles. And Number Munchers had a bunch of different spin-offs. You had like Fraction Munchers and Word Munchers. And later on DOS, you had Super Munchers. But unfortunately, I never got to play any of those. The only one that my school had, I believe, was Number Munchers. They could have had others, but I never found them, never saw them. This one was the only one that I got to play in the Munchers series. And then, of course, you've got the game that probably MECC is known for the best, and the game that lives on to this day in Oregon Trail. Now, in Oregon Trail, you had to, of course, traverse the Oregon Trail to get to Oregon. And you could start out and you could choose your character class, is what I would call it today. But and you could be like a carpenter, you could be a farmer, you could be a banker. And depending on what you chose, you got certain skills that you could use along the way. Like if you were a carpenter, let's say your wheel axle broke, you might be able to fix it. As a banker, you probably aren't going to be able to fix that. However, as a banker, you start off with a ton of cash to make the journey. So honestly, easy mode was the banker, because if you can buy extra of everything, you don't have to stress it. But as you make your way along the trail, you have to make certain decisions. Like occasionally you'll hit a river and you gotta decide whether you want to try to ferry it, ford it, or caulk your wagon up and try to float across it. And depending on what you chose and the weather conditions, which you could check out, would depend whether you made it across or not. You would like get random diseases along the way. You would run into maybe raiders. I believe they were meant to be Indians, but they changed it to raiders. That way they wouldn't have any discriminatory stuff in their game. But you would traverse the trail. You would make your way to certain cities or locations where you could refresh your supplies. There was also a hunting minigame. It was a blast where you're, no pun intended, but your character would be on this, I can't exactly describe it. It's a black screen, but you've got trees and shrubbery around you, and animals would run out there, and you could shoot them, and you could carry their meat back. However, you could only carry so much back. So you don't want to waste too much ammunition, because you might be a killer shot, but it don't matter if you can only carry back so much. Long story short, if you can take out one buffalo, just stop shooting. You're done. I think like maybe 2 or 3 deer, and you'd be done. Of course, small game like a rabbit, squirrel, and whatnot, you can take out quite a few of them. But towards the end of the game, you could actually caulk your wagon one more time. You could float down the river instead of floating across it to get to the Oregon Trail, and you'd be like dodging stuff along the way. And in this game, you had 5 party members. You'd make all the decisions, of course, but you get more points the more your party members survive, because a lot of your party members could die. And one cool little touch in this game as well was whenever they died, you could make a gravestone. And that gravestone would be at that location. You could put whatever you wanted on there. And, of course, being a bunch of 7- and 8-year-olds, you can just imagine what some of us put in those tombstones. Some of the teachers, I'm sure, discovered them and weren't too happy about it. But, yeah, this game was an absolute blast to play. I enjoyed Number Munchers as well, but these are the main 2 games that I played during my grade school time from MECC. And I really got to enjoy every chance I got to play them, which wasn't very often, to be honest. I don't know if maybe I just wasn't as good as some of the other students, but I had a very limited amount of time with these 2 games. But they always kind of held a memory with me, and I did go back eventually and found them. And you can load them up in Apple II emulator and play them. And like I said, Oregon Trail has had multiple revisions come out. You can play like a pretty modern version of it today, although I still really prefer that old school Apple II version. But in the show notes, you're going to find a link, and that link will be actually to mecc.co, and it's a repository that has disk images for all these Apple II games. I highly recommend it. And during my research for this, I also found a clip from an old TV show called Bits and Bytes. Never heard of this TV show myself, but they had some interesting information on MECC, which I'm going to go ahead and play for you now. I'm going to play the whole thing, because it really delves into the history of MECC and kind of some maybe controversial stuff today, how they had students that were making a lot of these games, and I kind of wonder, like, whether they're getting paid or whether they're getting royalties or not, because these people were still in school making these games. So, kind of interesting, but I want to go ahead and play that for you now.
It's true that there are huge quantities of software for micros on the market, but that raises the question, how is this material created in the first place? We went to the Minnesota Educational Computing Consortium to see how they go about producing educational software.
We take ideas that come from the actual classrooms, from teachers, from MECC staff who are working out in the fields. We collect those ideas. We kind of wait till we think we have enough to put together a whole package or a collection of programs. We kind of summarize that and we say, we think that this is what our application or our new disk might be.
The ISD manager selects a particular project to be done. And ISD manager selects one of the courseware developers who is going to head the team that develops that project.
The members would include teachers, subject matter consultants, designers, programmers, graphic art people, and possibly our editor.
They then sit down and say, okay, how can we put this together? How can we make it happen?
What we can see here is the job of the courseware developer, and what cannot be seen, what makes it all work, is the job of the student programmer, and in turn my job.
When the program is approximately 60% done, we start to think about what a user support material is going to look like or what it might be, and then the design person produces that. Finally, when we get the products done, which takes anywhere from 6 months to 12 months, we then go through review, and review.
MECC is not thinking in terms of delivering entire courses at this point. Possibly sometime in the future we will. Right now we're designing supplemental instructional packages to support or facilitate what the teacher is doing, rather than actually doing the job of teaching a course. The microcomputer is just a tool to assist them in teaching it. We just visited a classroom where these little kindergartners were singing the ABCs as they were doing that Caterpillar program on Elementary 7, and they were really having a good time with it. When you get away from just content and you think of the microcomputer and all the things that it can do above and beyond what a textbook can do, that's where things get exciting. Capabilities of graphics and sound are one of the real pluses of the microcomputers.
There are a couple of forms that the instructional designers fill out and give to the student programmers. One of them is this form, the display layout form. This indicates how a particular screen should appear, and it's usually pretty exact where everything should appear on the screen and how it should look. This is a frame for one program in our diskette Elementary 7. A random number of blocks was chosen, and the number appeared out to the side. On the next line, another random number of blocks was chosen and a number to the side, and a line drawn underneath. The student is expected now to add the blocks. He can count, or he can add the numbers, and press the number. This is indicated here by the thumb, and if he gets it wrong twice, the correct answer is indicated here on the bottom of the screen. The student programmer is directed pretty clearly as to how things should appear on the screen, and he gets to use his imagination on deciding how is he going to do this.
We work primarily with student programmers. These are high school and college level students that do most of the programming at MECC. We have 2 full-time programmers that are more or less in charge of that crew of student programmers.
The programmers will debug the program and probably add extra features and clean up anything like misspelled words, sentences, and improper format. Goes through an extensive review process. The programmer will get the program, he'll get it running, he'll give it to the documentation people, do a review of the program, and make decisions on the content of the program itself, and they give it back to the programmer. And that goes back and forth until everybody's happy, and then they document it and put it out for release.
There's now several companies that have come up with mass duplication machines where you basically put a bunch of items in a hopper and press a button and they flip out the bottom. But the process that we use here is a manual one disk in as master, make one copy. And for the way MECC distributes courseware, we can handle that because our unit sales of disks probably aren't more than 30 a day. Most of the courseware in Minnesota is obtained by teachers educators coming to what we call disco parties. Dis, CO out of copy. Disco parties, and what they do there is copy their discs. They bring in 15, 20 blank discs. They spend 5 hours copying them, and they drive home. So we use that method to distribute courseware in Minnesota, and we estimate that about 50,000 diskettes are made each 2 to 3 months.
And the demand for MECC software has just really gone up. We don't see that it's anywhere near tabling off at this point. We really haven't come near finding out what these things can do yet.
I think we send kids to school for 2 reasons, and only 2 reasons. One is to be a better communicator, and 2 is to be a problem solver. Now, the computer can't do a lot in communication unless you were to view the fact that it can allow you to get at more information and make you a better communicator. But it sure can make you a better problem solver because you solve more problems in different variables and different features, and you don't just solve problem 11 in the back of the chapter and go on to the next chapter. You try 3 or 4 combinations, so you learn what the concepts are and how to solve problems. And the computer is a problem solver, and we need problem-solving aids.
And MECC is by no means the only producer of educational software. There are many other publishers in the field, both in Canada and the U.S. There are lots of educational programs for the computers.
So that was recorded like during the heyday of MECC, which I think that it's really interesting just to hear all that was done and recorded like back whenever they were, in their prime, of course. Now, they were like hugely dominant back in the Apple II days, but they thought that they needed more money to compete for the home market. So they kind of got out of the school market to a degree and started pushing in for the home market. So it kind of changed out to a private company, and then they were publicly traded, and finally they were bought by SoftKey. Now, SoftKey changed their name later on to the Learning Company, so that's kind of a familiar name for some of you guys, because the Learning Company is one of the guys that were behind those Mario is Missing and the Mario's Time Machine games. So it's kind of interesting how we have that kind of fusion between then and now, how all this is kind of connected. Now, of course, eventually the Learning Company was bought by Mattel, and finally, at the end of it, the MEC offices in Minnesota closed down in October 1999, marking an end of a multi-decade history for MECC. So I find all that really, really interesting. I want to go back and play some of those games I missed out on. Eventually I will. But I did want to talk about them a bit because I feel like they've been kind of forgotten here in 2025. That, we think about Oregon Trail, but that's about all that we talk about. And it's kind of a shame because they've got a huge, rich history full of all these educational games that were quite good. Honestly, if I had to choose between playing Mario's Time Machine and Oregon Trail, I'd choose Oregon Trail any day of the week. But we're going to close out this episode by playing some music from Oregon Trail before we finally do our outro. As always, thank you for listening to another episode of Afterglow. If you're looking for more stuff in the podcast realm, be sure to check out our show notes where there's a link tree. In that link tree, you're going to find links to a bunch of other shows that I really think y'all should check out if you want to keep listening to shows like this. There's all kinds of content in there, and a lot of them are going to tell you why you should listen to their show at the end of this little outro that we do. On top of that, in that link tree, you're going to find a link to our Discord if you want to hang out and chat a little bit and try out our new Name That Game. Every Wednesday, I will be posting an NES game screenshot. And all you gotta do is identify what game it is. It's something that we do every Wednesday, just have a little bit of fun in there. Of course, there's all kinds of chatting and whatnot going on in there. I really hope you check it out. As well as all that, there is a merchandise store. If you want to grab like a magnet, a sticker, a t-shirt, you can find all that in that merch store. Or if you want to subscribe to the Patreon for $1 a month to get a shout out in every episode following, be sure to check that out as well. So, as always, two big thank you and shout outs go to TobyVonDoom from Secret Levels. He's the guy who came up with our show logo. And as well as Grim from the Lost and Gone podcast, along with the Grim Globe podcast, which I co-host. He's the guy that came up with our intro and outro music. And speaking of intros and outros, be sure to stick around for our outro and listen to some samples of all these other awesome shows that you should totally check out.
For more than 15 years, Retro Gaming Roundup has been the centre of your retro gaming universe, with top 10s, interviews, game reviews, news, and much more from all over the globe. Be sure to tune in every month for a new dose of Retro Gaming Roundup. That's RetroGamingRoundup.com.
Hey, this is Toby, one half of the Secret Levels podcast. We're a podcast that goes over old retro games. We go over the history, the story, the gameplay, some fun facts. We even rage a little bit. And then we go and give it a nice 1 to 10 rating to let you know if it's still worth playing. We have over 200 reviews for games on the NES, the Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, and many other consoles. You can find us on all the major podcasting apps, such as Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and you can follow us on social media at Secret Levels Pod. Game over, folks.
Hello and welcome to the Reviews Brothers. It's me, Martin, and you can join me on YouTube where I have hundreds of videos covering a huge range of video game topics. I've got top 10s, hidden gems, console-focused A to Zs, as well as dedicated videos to topics like Doom mods, 3D platform games, ninja games, pirate games, and more. I cover all systems from Commodore 64 right up to modern consoles. Nothing gaming is off the table. So be sure to search for the Reviews Brothers on YouTube as well as on Instagram and TikTok for hundreds of retro and modern video game reviews.
Afterglow listeners, it's me, Keith Gasper, coming at you from the #1 retro gaming podcast, the Main Quest Podcast. Come hang out as a guest and I play and discuss a game from the backlog of my childhood. We're talking about our history and the history of the game, and if it's worth checking out today. We're talking about games from the NES, the Sega Genesis, TurboGrafx, Game Boy, and much more. And that's just on the main feed. If you enjoy what you're hearing on Afterglow, you're going to enjoy the Main Quest, and I'm happy to have you. Find the Main Quest on Apple Podcasts, Good Pods, Spotify, and wherever great podcasts are downloaded.
Hello, my name is Aaron. I'm one half of Super Pod Saga, a topical variety video game podcast fueled entirely by nostalgia and unleaded gasoline. Super Pod Saga, we discuss a different video game topic each and every week. We have new episodes every single Monday covering a different video game topic. More than anything, we want to entertain our listeners and make you feel like you're one of the boys, like you're hanging out at a campfire with some of your best zany, caffeine-powered buddies and just talking about your favorite games and all that stuff. Stop on down to Super Pod Saga. It's on every podcatcher there is. If it's not, let me know and we'll get on it. Again, Super Pod Saga, stop on by.